what I'd like to talk with you about is questions and the practice of dealing with questions in the church setting. And essentially the question of, can I ask that in church? How wrestling with tough questions helps students' faith thrive at the university. So I've been a university professor in a secular university since 2003. And I've had lots of opportunities to interact with students about questions of faith, and I get lots of questions from students and from colleagues, but more questions from students. There are more of the students after all. We have about 40,000, and you know, in these contexts, I've learned a lot about the kinds of questions that students ask who are from a Christian background and students who are not from a Christian background. And so I want to think about both those contexts. So a little bit of background on me. One of my favorite childhood memories is crawling up on the roof with my dad. This wasn't necessarily a mom-approved thing to do, but we would crawl up on the roof at night and we would look at the stars together. And my dad would teach me a lot of things. He would teach me about, you know, the moon and the stars and the planets, and we would watch this beauty of the stars together. I was always hoping to find a UFO, so I really had my eyes peeled hoping to spot that UFO, which I never did find a UFO. I think my dad probably saw that one coming. But needless to say that, you know, I was hooked by the wonder of the universe, the enormity of it, the beauty of it, and just the wondering of what's out there. And this and, you know, several other interactions with my dad growing up really inspired me to become a scientist. I want to know more about the universe. I want to know more about how things work. And I think it's just a beautiful universe that God has given us to live in for now and to explore and to figure out. Now, then as I was heading off to college, now I grew up in a church. I actually grew up in Southern Baptist churches, and I became a believer at a very young age. When I was 4, my Sunday school teacher encouraged us to pray to receive Jesus into our hearts, and of course I did. Jesus loves kids, you know, so I was very enthusiastic about that from a young age. But then as I got older and my faith grew and I learned more things, I started to ask questions. And my last year of high school, I had just gotten into, you know, my dream college, Caltech, a school devoted to science and engineering. And so I was feeling called by God to head into a career either in sciences or engineering. And just as I was heading off, something rather devastating happened to my faith. I was asking serious questions in church, and some of the questions that I was asking about how to reconcile science and faith, for example, my Sunday school teacher, who by the way, I love, and I have very fond memories of him. Some of the questions I asked were a little bit of a stretch for him. And so he gave me a book to read. And in his very, very well-meaning attempt to equip my faith, right? What was his purpose? He wanted to equip me for the university. He knew I wanted to become a scientist or engineer. I was asking tough questions about how to reconcile that all with the faith. And so he handed me a book about these issues. And unfortunately, the book that he gave me essentially put up this dichotomy. It basically said that you needed to choose between God and science. Now, he didn't know that. It's just that this particular book had the perspective that if the Bible is right and if it says X, Y, and Z, then a lot of science is wrong. And so the message that gave me as a young person was actually that they were incompatible. And so it's like in a well-meaning attempt to equip me for college, it's like my church pulled the rug out from under my faith, and I was devastated. So I entered college with my faith rather shaken. I was no longer sure that God had actually written the Bible, and I was rather frightened, okay? So this is the message that I received. I received the message that you have to choose between Jesus and science. And I now know that I wasn't the only young person receiving that message. And in fact, a lot of young people today are still receiving that message from the church. I don't think any of us intend to send it, but it's definitely a received message. And so this is still a message that I'm hearing a lot of young people struggling with, both young people who grew up in a church like I did, and young people who didn't grow up in a church but are curious about God. So whether we mean it or not, a lot of young people are getting this message that they have to choose between Jesus and science. And so what are the fruits of that received message? What does it lead to? I have met a lot of young Christians at the university who leave the sciences. As a result, they get the message they have to choose. They choose Jesus, they leave science. This is especially true of the students who were interested in biology. I meet a lot of young Christians who left biology as a result of receiving this message. There are young Christians who go the other direction and abandon their faith altogether, not knowing how to reconcile the truth claims of science with the truth claims of Christianity. Then there's the effect it has on other parts of the university, such as my colleagues, the professors. I have a brilliant colleague who's a geology professor, and he recounted to me one of his experiences on this issue. He had a freshman student who thought it was his Christian duty to tell this professor that geology is wrong. So what was the received message then to my colleague, the esteemed geologist? His received message was, well, then, the Bible wasn't written by whoever made this earth, because I've studied this earth and these are the characteristics of it. When I travel, as a scientist, I do travel around the world, not during the pandemic, but pre-pandemic, when I would travel and visit other universities to talk about my work. When colleagues find out that I'm a Christian, if they haven't found it out already, the next question they almost always ask has to do with something like, how can you be a Christian when the Bible says X, Y, and Z that contradict science? So whether we as a church intend it or not, there's a lot of people in society, especially young people, who are receiving a message that they have to choose between Jesus and science. In fact, it's not just anecdotal. Here's the results of a Barna survey from 2011 about why young adults leave the church. And 30% of them who have left the church said that the church is out of step with science. That was a contributor to them leaving. 25% said the church is unscientific, or anti-scientific, I should say. And 23% were turned off by the creation-evolution debate. A Pew survey in 2015 asked the question, are science and faith in conflict? And they found that 50% of people who attend church weekly said yes, they are. And 73% of people who seldom or never attend church also said yes. So this is, whether we Christians intend it to be or not, this is a perceived conflict and a perceived tension, both in secular culture and in the Christian community. Dave Kinnaman, who was president of the Barna Group, had this to say about it. He said, there's a generation of young Christians who believe that the churches in which they were raised are not safe and hospitable places to express doubts. Many feel that they have been offered slick or half-baked answers to their thorny, honest questions. So I see the fruits of that at the university, and in talking with Christian students when they arrive at the university. This, by the way, is an artist's conception of what cars could look like in the future if they're self-driving. But what I like about this car is that it's made of stained glass, and I feel like when Christian students arrive at the university, sometimes their theology is a little bit like this car. It's a little bit like they're driving around in a glass car. Now, this is a very pretty car. However, would you really want to drive that on the freeway? What's one of the problems with it, right? One of the problems is that if you were to have any slight fender bender or even maybe a bump in the road, this car is going to smash up and fall to pieces, right? So I feel like a lot of the Christian students, not all, but a lot of the Christian students, when they arrived at the university, they've been taught theology extensively. They have been taught a very well-developed and well thought out, consistent, self-consistent theology that's very detailed, but they haven't been taught at the same time that there's a hierarchy of ideas. It's almost like they arrive with a glass theology. It's all well developed, but there's only one version of it. And there's no wiggle room. There's no shock absorbers in their theology. And so when they hit a bump in the road in the form of new information that they learn at the university that appears to conflict with one part of the theology, it's like the whole thing shatters. It's like they were driving in a car made out of stained glass. It doesn't have to be this way, of course. We can help students to have, let's say, more shock absorbers in their faith before they arrive. And I think this is an important piece to keep in mind, that some ideas are more important than others. And this is even true, of course, within Christianity. We have within Christian theology, we have a hierarchy of ideas, and the core of the faith is very, very simple, very pure, right? The core of the faith goes back to our historic confessions that Jesus is the Son of God. He died to make up for the evil that I did, and this restores my relationship with God so that I can live with him forever. This is the core. This is who we are as Christians, and this is our historical confession of faith. You'll notice that there's no statement about science in here. And so, we have core ideas that make us who we are. And then within theology, we also, have other ideas and so forth, but they can be arranged in a hierarchy, right? The core doctrine being the most important. And then there's another set of ideas in theology that are not as critical and crucial as the core. And then there are even farther out sets of issues. And so I think it's extremely helpful for students to have that kind of perspective before they get to college, for them to have an idea of, okay, these are the central tenets of my faith. And when our students start asking questions that are, a third or fourth order level of theology, I think at that point, especially for high school students who are heading off into college, at that point, it's appropriate and helpful to help them think a little bit more broadly, rather than teaching them exactly what to think about every detail of theology. Find some piece, right? Find some piece of the theology that in our church we can agree to disagree about rather loudly, and intentionally teach that on this issue we don't agree. It's a third or fourth order theology issue. It doesn't bear on how salvation works or who God is or who we are as Christians. It's a third or fourth order category of theology, but we're going to agree to disagree on it. And here are 4 different views that Christians take on this, or here are 3 different views. And this to me would be a very, very powerful way to equip students as they come in. And, part and parcel with that actually is encouraging questions. It's not just our Christian students who are heading off to the university who benefit from that kind of equipping, but I think it also makes us stronger evangelists. This is a Southern Baptist seminary, and we're very big on the Great Commission in the Southern Baptist churches. I love atheists. I love talking to atheist friends and colleagues about Christianity. And what I find when I do that is that they often have questions. So I love my atheist friends and colleagues, but I also find that they ask hard questions. And this has been consistent at many levels and in many different interactions I've had. There was my friend Harry, who was not a believer, but very interested in Christianity when we were in high school. And his questions were brilliant. He was brilliant. His questions were brilliant. Didn't bother me at first, but eventually they kind of wore me down. And eventually his questions really kind of dragged my faith through the mud. It was a little scary. I bring up Richard Smalley, the Nobel Prize winning discoverer of buckyball. So if you've heard of nanotubes, carbon nanotubes. And so he visited Purdue my first year as a faculty member. So my first year as a faculty member, he gave a public lecture. I was there with a lot of my colleagues from the physics department. And at least 3 times from the stage publicly at Purdue, he made fun of belief in God or belief in Jesus. Okay, so there was an atheist from the stage, posing some kind of making some digs at Christianity. And then I think also my colleague Katya, who brilliant when she was getting her PhD in theoretical physics in graduate school. She would pester Christians with questions and get so angry at the Christians for not having good answers. Okay, so sometimes we find too that our atheist friends are asking us, really tough questions. So how do we as a church think about that? I think we can turn questions into something that can be very powerful, not just for strengthening the faith of believers, and for example, equipping young people before they head off into the university, but also can make us better at talking to our atheist friends and our seeker friends who ask questions. If we think about, what do we see with Jesus and questions? Jesus would pose questions to his audiences, right? And Jesus took questions publicly. In his discourses, there would be questions, not just from friendly people, but from people who were trying to trip him up publicly. So Jesus welcomed questions to be asked of him, and he also asked questions of his audiences. And this is an aspect of how Jesus taught that I don't always see modeled in the church, right? Some places, yes, so in small groups or small Bible studies, but I've only seen it practiced once on a Sunday morning in say the sermon time, and so for the most part, those very public parts of church life can often seem like a place where questions just really aren't even welcome. Research on how people learn shows that people learn best when they get to wrestle with material by asking questions. Questions posed by the teacher to the student and questions posed from the student to the teacher really do foster better learning than if questions are discouraged. And so one of the things I want to challenge us about as a Christian community is, rather than telling our young people exactly what to think about everything, rather than giving them this highly detailed theology, but only one theology, is that we think about also how to think, how to teach them how to think. And that includes creating spaces where they can ask questions, where they can feel safe in church asking questions, right? They're essential to learning. If you are trying to teach people and no one's asking any questions, either they're not learning deeply, they haven't thought deeply enough to have the question, or they haven't been challenged. Maybe the material wasn't hard enough. Maybe we didn't say anything interesting, or they can be too scared to ask. As a physics professor, I encounter that a lot when I'm teaching a freshman class. I have to work hard to draw the questions out of my students in those contexts, because I know they have questions. So my challenge there is to simply try to create an environment where they feel safe to ask those questions. But people really do retain the information better when they get to have that environment, when they get to struggle with the material. In fact, in student feedback from my lectures at Purdue, one of the students wrote, "I like that you never give us the answer," meaning not that I wasn't willing to dialogue with them, but in fact, when they would ask me a question, I would often pose a question back in an attempt to kind of draw them along and draw out their line of reasoning and help them reason things out on their own. Sometimes we have to knock down barriers though, right? Sometimes we have situations where people are scared to ask. And the only way past that one, the only way, to knock down those barriers is to intentionally encourage questions, In a physics lecture hall, I have several methods for doing this, including I am not below passing out candy for questions asked, okay? I have lots of tricks up my sleeve for getting a room full of, 200 freshmen to open up and ask me questions. In churches, I would encourage us to create safe spaces for students to ask questions and to openly invite those questions. And then we have to be careful too in how we deal with the questions, right? We have to deal with the questions in such a way that we make it very clear that those questions are welcomed and respected, and it's okay to not know all the answers, but we're not afraid of your questions because God isn't afraid of our questions. And I love creating these kinds of spaces, both in my own church and at the university. So in my own church, I have oftentimes run faith and science lectures there, and we make it very clear all questions are welcomed and respected, and we love hearing the questions. And in fact, we create those environments. Once the Christians see how these questions go, and that we create an environment where questions are welcomed and dealt with respectfully, then they're not afraid to bring their seeker friends, okay? Because because sometimes what happens when you bring a seeker friend to church, they can ask a real humdinger of a question, right? And I've certainly experienced that in church, and I love it. I love it when young people bring their atheist friends or seeker friends to church, and those atheist friends want to, you know, have kind of a hostile question and answer. That's great. I love that when people are asking questions. That's when we can have real dialogue. So we do, you know, we have concerns, right, about trying to create those question-friendly spaces where young people can wrestle with questions. They can bring their friends who have the questions. There are downsides, right? We don't know all the answers. That's kind of scary to admit, but it might just be helpful to admit that right up front. You know, we don't have all the answers, but we're going to respect your question. We may not know the answer, but we can certainly dialogue with you about it and read more about it, right? And at the same time remain humble that human ability to reason is limited, and our knowledge is limited. I think an extremely important thing to communicate, not just to young people in church, but to our seeker friends, right? Our friends who are curious about Christianity, is that Christians don't always agree. Christians don't all agree on how to answer some of the toughest questions we get, both from, you know, our seeker friends who are interested in Christianity, and that Christians ourselves ask about faith. We all together can ask some very tough questions, and we'll find that within the Christian community, there's a variety of answers that have been put forth for those. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so helpful for young people to experience that in a church, right? Experience that in a church before they get off to the university, to understand that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay that Christians don't agree on certain answers. And that perhaps, you know, the most helpful thing we can do is give people the set of answers, you know, just be real upfront with people. You know, some Christians answer it this way. Some Christians answer it this way. Some Christians answer it this way. Especially, you know, when it concerns things that are not about the core doctrine. And sometimes we have, you know, this concern, especially in a church, we want spiritual unity, right? We don't want to create environments where people are going to be at each other's throats. So we have this question: can controversy coexist with the spiritual unity that we're supposed to have? This is an example of one of the ways that we've tried to create those environments through the Ratio Christi chapter at Purdue. Ratio Christi is an apologetics club for students on university campuses. UFC, by the way, stands for Ultimate Fight Club. This is me on the left, and my good friend Joe on the right. Joe is now one of the regional directors in Ratio Christi, and we planned to have a bit of a debate, really, about the age of the earth and what the Bible has to say about the age of the earth. That could be a hot button topic for Christians, and we can disagree vehemently on that. And in fact, you know, you probably wouldn't surprise you to learn that as a physics professor, I believe the data that the Earth is 4.58 billion years old, and that the universe is 14 or 15 billion years old, you know, plus or minus some error bars there. Joe is what you call a young Earth Christian. He believes the Earth is only a few thousand years old, and that's what the Bible teaches. Joe and I love each other, though. I mean, I love ministering with Joe. Joe has so many years of experience evangelizing students on campus. It is an absolute joy to work with Joe on campus. So one of our purposes in running the event we did, the Age of the Earth discussion, but then we also called it UFC Ultimate Fight Club, was simply to demonstrate to students that we can, as Christians, disagree on something that Joe and I both feel quite strongly about, but Joe and I love each other. We wanted to model to students, what does it look like to respectfully dialogue with someone you think is wrong and love each other anyway. So the upside to having places like this, where all questions are welcomed and respected, and we create some environments where we intentionally teach Christians that there are multiple views on something within Christianity is that students are trained to think and to reason. And when we create environments where all questions are welcomed and respected, ultimately it means that all people are welcomed and respected. Really, really, this is about character building. It's about spiritual formation. That's why we like to do it. It's about love and humility and listening and respect. And it trains Christian young people in the art of reconciliation and the spiritual unity aspects of that. So here's me and Joe at the end of our discussion, okay? We had a good, robust discussion. You know, I explained why I thought Joe was wrong and I thought I was right, and he did the same. And of course, we're friends, we love each other. We made it absolutely clear that what Jesus has done for me and what Jesus has done for Joe and what Jesus has done for you is far, far, far more important than any disagreement we might have about a theological detail about what the Bible says about the age of the earth. And that really was our point in having the discussion. As I take some of these discussions on the road, I do give speaking engagements at several universities around the world. And I love talking with young people about faith. I love it when they bring their atheist friends to ask questions. And in one of these speaking engagements, an atheist who had been, asking some of the scarier questions at the end, approached me after the talk to talk more. Why? Why did he come up and want to talk to me more? Because when he asked his sticky, thorny questions, I treated his question with respect. I handled his question respectfully. I took it seriously. I understood where he was coming from. And so, so at the end of the talk, I was kind of drawing him out. I found that a good way to draw out seekers is to ask them, so how long have you been an atheist? It kind of brings out, in his case, he actually was raised a believer. And his story took a sad turn at that point. When he was in high school, he started asking some of those thorny questions. And unfortunately, his church, rather than welcoming the questions and wrestling with him on the questions, he felt treated as though he were morally wrong for having even posed the questions. And unfortunately, that turned him away from the church, but he still really was hungry for the truth. And so, in fact, he and his friend followed those of us who had organized the event, went to a diner afterwards, after the audience had gone away. We went to a diner. This atheist young man and his friend asked to come along, saying, "We have never been around Christians before who take our questions seriously." And they were hungry for more. Not that we had the answers, okay? This young man definitely asked me questions. I had to just admit, wow, that's a really good question. I'm going to think about that, but that won his respect, and it won him, it won us all several lovely hours of conversation with him as he was wrestling with issues of faith. This is often what happens at the end of events like that. Young people are hungry. They're hungry for environments where they can ask tough questions about the faith. And it's not only the Christian students, it's also their seeker friends they bring to the events. So for example, one time when I was speaking at Cru here at Purdue, the theme of the evening was this. Cru is very big on sharing your faith. And so what I had discussed ahead of time with the organizers was, I said, when I share my faith on campus, my colleagues ask some really tough questions. I bet your students have the same experience. Can we talk about that? And so what we did was we ran a Facebook poll in advance, and it said, what kind of questions are your atheist friends asking you? And we posted 15 different questions, and we had the students vote in advance. The deal was that I would deal with their top 3 that Friday night at Cru. And it was a packed house. The students loved having that online interaction in advance where they got to set the agenda. This is part of what young people really love about the question-driven environment. They get to set the agenda. And then, more than 20 students stayed around after the event 2 extra hours. They were so hungry for a place where they could get their questions out on the table and have the questions dealt with respect and with humility, and in a place where they really felt respected and welcomed. These kind of interactions, so that particular event actually led to the formation of, for a few years here at Purdue, we were running what we called the Friends of Atheist support group. Okay, so that set of 20 Cru students who stuck around afterwards, they were hungry to be equipped on how to dialogue with their friends who were asking tough questions about Christianity, the friends who were curious. And so we called it the Friends of Atheist support group. And we would get together every week. The only agenda was, okay, what are your seeker friends asking you? What are the kinds of questions that you need backup on? And you know, what can we point you to read? What can we discuss together? That sort of thing. And I think not only does creating these kind of spaces where questions are safe to ask, not only does it help Christians keep their faith when they go out into the university, not only does it make our own faith stronger as believers. I know that my faith was tremendously strengthened by wrestling with tough questions. It was scary at first, but God is faithful. Imagine this with me, okay? What would happen if we, as the body of believers, succeeded in training a generation of young Christians who are not afraid of tough questions, who welcome them, and who, because they've been trained on how to wrestle with tough questions in their church, they have been trained with how to engage in dialogue with people they disagree with. They know how to maintain love, respect, and polite discourse while disagreeing. How would that transform society? We need our young people, we need all of us, right? All of us believers to be able to engage with society. Why? God has called us to be salt and light into the world. Society needs us, right? Society needs the church to maintain a robust discussion that's polite and respectful about important things on moral issues like stem cell research, designer babies, the right to life, reproductive technologies, artificial intelligence. That one's coming if you haven't heard it yet. End of life care. These are all thorny issues where we want the church to be able to speak into society because society needs Christian voices there. And we'll be much better equipped to do it as we train ourselves and as we train the next generation about how to have polite and respectful discourse with people we disagree with. It also makes us not just better positioned to impact society, but it makes us better evangelists as well. So I'm going to end on this slide about the upside of creating spaces in church life where all questions are welcomed and respected. I do believe it empowers believers to be better at explaining the gospel to their friends, but it also equips our young people to have a more shock-proof faith before they get to the university.